We didn't really know until she was about 9 months, and we observed that, we noticed that she didn't really respond to sounds, but it was not very, it's hard to tell because I guess at that age they compensate, right? I think deaf kids compensate by being more sensitive to vibrations and being more, and they have better peripheral vision, I think, right? Because I guess they have to rely on it more. So we took her
to get tested.
Yeah, right around. I think it was right around her first birthday that she was tested, and at that point, we really honestly don't know much about deafness at all. So at that point, it was just an audiologist. That was our first contact, and
it was not a pediatric audiologist.
Yeah.
It was just like a general audiologist. I think who mostly, had senior citizens as their clients.
Yeah, and I think. So she was in the sound booth, and I think Mia had, I think Annette had to be there with Mia, and they play sounds, and the conclusion was that she was in fact profoundly deaf. And I think this audiologist, it's funny I can actually remember this. This audiologist, I think, really didn't know what to do because she wasn't really involved with children a lot. And so,
but what they did have was a binder of educational resources that they gave us, which I was surprised at.
So, so we really didn't know much about deafness at all. So,
when a baby's born, whether they're deaf or hard of hearing, they're ready to learn. Babies have that exciting potential. And the only difference between a baby who's deaf and one who's hearing is in access. A deaf child, if they're given visual access, then the sky's the limit for them. If they're given access to a visual language, sign language, then the sky is the limit for their cognitive development and their readiness to learn, their readiness for academics, and their eventual readiness for the world and to develop world knowledge.
I remember it was Halloween. And I remember having her sitting on my lap in the booth with her little costume and going through all the testing. And she was not responding. And at that point, I didn't get what that meant. When I left, they told me, your daughter's deaf, she's not hearing. And I didn't even know what questions to ask. I didn't know what that meant. I had never met anybody who was deaf.
We really stand at a time where new techniques and new technologies allow us to understand the brain in new ways. But some of the lessons that we learn are lessons that we've known for a long time. That learning to be a good reader depends on being a good language user. And learning to be a good language user, whether it's oral language or whether it's sign language, depends on good early experience.
So I think I know that it wasn't overwhelming. I mean, I think there was maybe a few times where I felt kind of anxiety about like what her life would be like.
Yeah, of course. I think that's.
But I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But to me, it's like, how do you deal with that? You just got to learn more about it. Right? I mean, it's.
No, it just changed the way we did things, and we just adapted. And I don't think there was, we didn't dwell. Who were we going to blame, and why were we going to blame somebody? This has happened. We just figured we need to move forward. We need to progress. There's no looking back, and I don't think we ever did that. And I think that's kind of the way we planned moving forward. Was I think we did more planning ahead than we did looking back. And I think we did that on a regular basis. We weren't going to go back and figure out we should have did this or we should have did that. Hey, that's done. Let's move on. Let's figure out where we're going to go and how we're going to do it. I think that's what we did. We didn't look back try to blame anybody or feel sorry or anything else. And wonder.
And so naturally, we wanted to connect with the deaf community, deaf people, because we didn't know anybody. My daughter was the first deaf person we had met.
Yes, you're going to be shocked, and yes, you're going to go through the grieving process, but a deaf kid is going to grow up to be a deaf adult and just be a normal person. They just happen to be deaf.
Yeah, so I think the important thing is to really learn. I think for us is, and I think it's good to know what you're dealing with instead of trying to, have preconceptions about what deaf people are like or what their lives might be like. It's I think it's really important to meet a lot of deaf people from different walks of life.
After the first couple of days, you decide, okay, well, this is what we can handle, and now how are we going to deal with it? And, she was a lively kid. She was happy and bright, and so we just started being more visual with her. I remember the first time I actually gestured with her specifically, knowing that she was deaf, was when she had climbed on a chair and was trying to get up, and I basically did this to her, and she sat back down. So I said, oh.
Some of the things that we've learned so far, even though we're just beginning to understand the brain and we have a long way to go, some of the things that we've learned so far I think are important to all parents and all folks who are trying to teach their children those skills that are critical for educational success. The first thing, and it won't be any surprise in some ways, is that the most important thing we can do for our child in preparing them to become successful in school, and particularly in reading, is to provide enriched, stimulative language experience in the earliest years. So the brain, when we come into the world, needs lots of stimulation, lots of language experience, lots of exposure to language communication. And if this is given to a child, this creates a kind of developmental pattern, a kind of critical focus for the brain that allows language communication to proceed in a normal way.
It's just natural. I mean, even the iconic signs of drinking and eating and sleeping, everybody knows 3 signs. There's high, there's 4. You can learn those so quickly, and it's very rewarding when you're getting instant feedback from your child.
Sign language is a language that has its own vocabulary, its own rules for word order, different parts of linguistic characteristics that you would expect for any language. Whatever spoken language has, sign language has.
At the school, we have sign language classes for the parents, and once they get over the, I don't know if I can do it, it's amazing. They can just dive right in, and they do just fine. A lot of times it's just that mental holdup.
Well, we know that signed languages are as complex as spoken languages. They've got complex syntax. They are commonly used as the language of scientific communication and academic communication. They've got a grammar. They can express subtle semantic distinctions. So certainly a deaf child who's learning a sign language is not learning anything that is any less expressive than a spoken language. And sign language does have the advantage that the children can acquire it right away. They have the visual system and the manual system that allows them to get right into the system very quickly. And so it has those advantages for a child who is deaf.
Actually, I like enjoy because it's so, that's...
Feels good to sign it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like enjoy, and I like a lot of the signs where you use one motion to describe something, like inform a lot of people. It's like, it's just,
Yeah.
you just say so much with just really, with one movement. So I like that.
Yeah, and I mentioned before classifiers, like that, it describes a lot, like, a car, like it's going that way, it's going that way, it's just so amazing.
Gossip.
Yeah.
Gossip
Yeah.
is also gossip. Yeah. Is it two or?
Yeah, yes.
I feel really strongly that it's a family decision that has to be made. Your decisions affect the whole family. It's not just the child. It's not just one parent. It's not just both parents. There's the whole family, even not just the siblings, but it extends to the outer family as well. So I know sometimes families maybe can't go to a sign language class because they're trying to work 2 jobs, and then they've got to come home and they have a family. But there has to be a way for a parent to be able to find a way to learn a little bit, even if it means the child's teaching the parent. But the parent has to be there for that. The child needs that. The child deserves that.
The brain needs to have language for development. All children, when they're born, need to have language in their environment, and they need to have access to that language. The brain depends on that exposure for its development. My research has to do with the impact of signed language on the brain's development. There's nothing magical about sign language. It's a language, but it's visual. And if you want a child to have full access to language and they can't hear language, then it's best to provide that language through a visual means, because that way they'll have full access to language. By having full access to language, it will help the brain to develop. My research in specific looks at their ability to learn, children's ability to attend, regulate their emotions, control their impulsive behaviors, their thinking, everything. Language in early life, if it's sign language, if deaf children are given access to language early in life, then they will be able to develop on course with their hearing peers.
So, I mean, we had that decision, what do we do? Do we go oral? Do we go sign? And I think really for us it was actually an easy decision, because her loss was profound, and we felt if we go oral, and we are right and she does okay, then fine. But we felt that was not probably a likely outcome, and so we decided to go the signing route, and we felt it was more important to get language in her head first, and we'll worry about the other stuff later, the speech and the English and whatever, because we had read enough to know that the brain goes through that early development. It's like you have like a 2-year window to get the basis of language, and we had read that even for kids who don't get that good language foundation, this is our interpretation, even if they later get their hearing back somehow, they never quite have good language like if you get that good foundation in early. So we decided we would go sign language, knowing nothing.
Oh yeah, we didn't even know the ABCs. I mean, we knew nothing. But again, we had read that the brain only has that small window, and you have to get it wired for language, and you know, we didn't want to go. It was a crapshoot if we used oral.
Generally, when it comes to learning a language, earlier is better. Studies of children acquiring spoken languages suggests that children who acquire it when they are young are more likely to speak it without an accent. They're less likely to make subtle grammatical errors of the kind that we're familiar with from immigrants who learn a language later in life. Even later in childhood is not as effective as early in childhood. And we've pretty much come to realize that through research on language, that all of the conclusions that you might draw about learning a spoken language also apply to learning a signed language. So with the sign language, as with the spoken language, earlier is better.
You know, if the kids are small, it's great to go to a school and see these kids running around on the playground and having conversations and doing the same thing. If you didn't know it was deaf kids at a deaf school, you look at it like these kids are just any other kids at any other school. They do the same things. They fall, they bump their knees, they cry, they fight, they play ball together, they make their teams, and they run around and just have a great time. And I think it is. It's going out there and seeing what's out available. I mean, that's what you need to do.
So the other thing is so that was one thing. So we thought ASL was more natural for deaf people because it turns out all deaf people, even ones who are fairly oral, we've noticed, when they are together with other deaf people, they would sign, mostly ASL, I think.
I think ASL gives me access to a beautiful world, a very rich world full of interesting people and interesting work and interesting stories. With American Sign Language, I don't think I would have that same experience in the world. Without the world of sign language, it would be different because it's opened up so many things for me. I've become a world traveler, I've become a teacher. I'm now studying towards my PhD because of that. I love sign language. It's become part of who I am. I can't imagine life without it. I couldn't.
I mean, Monica didn't have a cochlear, but I don't know that I don't see that there would be any hindrance to using sign language with a cochlear while you're learning to talk or speak. But language, there's that small window of opportunity where you're trying to get all this stuff for your kid, and it's just so visual. It's amazing. It's amazing to see these little guys have amazing, just extensive conversations. It's doable. It's wonderful.
And so being at CSD, having our daughter at CSD, you meet a lot of deaf people and you get to understand, what's it like. I mean, it revolves around a lot of signing. I mean, signing is the key way to communicate. And I think it's a good home for deaf people because even a lot of very oral deaf people, I think they feel at home there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's difficult, right? I mean, even it varies. The amount of hearing and speech for deaf people varies so much, right? There are people who are, speak absolutely perfectly, and still they prefer to have an interpreter. I mean, because it's very difficult. I think it's hard for hearing people to understand how difficult it is for a deaf person to be in an environment where everybody is speaking at the same time, right? For us, we don't think twice about it. I mean, for hearing people, right? Because we can kind of screen out all the other sounds very easily, and it's very difficult to do that for even a very oral deaf person. So I think they feel at home there, right? I mean, a lot of deaf people feel at home in that community, and so that's really that's how I see it. It's the home. It's the sort of the home for my daughter, right?
Yeah.
And to me, one of the most important things is that the child is learning language, that they have access to language. And again, too many times people mistake learning how to voice things as language, or learning how to say things, so I say words, sounds as language. That's not language. So even if you're trying to still figure things out, I think learning sign language, learning ASL is going to be extremely beneficial. You're not wasting your time, certainly. If you're going along and you find that maybe your child has strengths in other areas, you've lost nothing.
Children must have access to language. Deaf children and hard of hearing children usually have less access to spoken language. Regardless of whether they use hearing aids or cochlear implants, they still have a reduced amount of impact. And that presents a concern because there's a risk. For the brain to develop, it must have full access to language. And since sign language is a visual language, if a child can see fine, then they'll have full access to language early in life, from infancy on through childhood, and they can develop their language according to the same milestones that you see for spoken language. They'll develop their words and two-word pairs on the same course as hearing children. But if you don't give them language, that child's own language development will see a delay, and that delay will then have consequences for brain development, which is what my research shows. Children need to have access to a full language early in life, regardless of what language it is, as long as they have full access to that language, and ASL can provide that access.
In terms of, our goal was also to communicate any way you can with your child, right? And we just started signing right away. Went to the library, got books and videos, and because you want to be able to communicate with your child for their needs and to express their feelings. Those are all really, really, really important things for children. To be able to do that. And you just have to do whatever you can. I mean, if Mia were born today, who knows, what our options are, what we would have done. We might have had, we may have put a cochlear implant in her, but
yeah, I think
there's this divide between cochlear implant or ASL.
Well,
but
I don't think there ought to be, right? Because I think it's, first of all, it's not a cure for deafness. Because a lot of people who are implanted with cochlear implants, they still sign, right? And they feel like they're part of deaf culture. I think, and also it doesn't work for everyone, right? The outcome is very different, right? Some people it works great, and some kids it helps, but.
So that's why you have to have your options open, even if the child has an implant, and the family decides to implant, you can still sign with them. It's not gonna, like I said, any way you can get language and communication with the child that's the ultimate goal, I think, for any child, whether they're hearing or deaf.
What we would do is really just bring everything, we brought everything home. If we wanted to learn about the ocean, the house was the ocean, we were going to the ocean, we were just bringing it all in. But there was always the sign language. She did get speech therapy at school, but that's not where she was getting language. She was learning to make sounds, to say things the way people wanted her to say, but that was not her language. So the sign language really helped put it all together for her.
One thing that's been discovered for sure is that early exposure to enriched language experience through signing, just as with hearing children, is critical for creating the brain readiness to learn to read. Another important finding that has emerged from recent research is that providing children with an understanding of the phonology of sign and the phonology of sign language is an important early experience, as it is with hearing children. And maybe this is not surprising. To create the connections in brain that allow reading to develop in an efficient and normal way.
So so actually when Mia was really small, she came up with a little ASL poem on her own, which was, she started like with a worm, and then she said the worm would turn into, like she would just go like this, and then it would, she'd do something like this, and it would turn into a butterfly like that, right? So she did that on her own. So it was probably like second grade or something like that.
Yeah, and we made a fun project out of that. So in terms of promoting literacy and all that, so we turned that into a little project. We did a ton of. They didn't have. We didn't do a movie, but we took a lot of still shots at a fast speed, and then we made a flip book for her out of that, and that was cool to see. Yeah, when she was about 3, right? 3 or 4. Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah, and so that kind of thing, to help with her literacy, and maybe it was the start of her photography. Maybe it was just that exposure to photography.
She was always very visual.
Yeah.
She's a very visual learner. She likes to learn by playing with things. I mean, I think that's probably, different kids have different ways of learning things. Her way is really to experience them as opposed to reading about it.
Yeah.
So, which fits her,
Yeah.
I think. She's a visual learner.
Yeah.
And VL2, under the leadership of Dr. Laura Ann Petito, has said that the brain does not discriminate against language or modality. The brain simply wants to be stimulated. The brain doesn't care how it gets that stimulation. So deaf children, what works normally and what's optimal for deaf children is to use their visual system to the fullest extent possible.
So, the thing that you're asking about storytelling, I don't have a lot of memories of reading to her. I know her mom did. When she was small, we'd open a book and we'd sign back and forth, and we'd have a typical young child parent experience. The strong memories I have is sort of telling her stories, acting them out. I have a background in theater, and my daughter now is studying theater and acting. And so I have a memory of telling her stories and acting them out, and anybody can act out the Three Little Bears story, and you just have to let yourself be uninhibited with your kid. They're your kids, and you're going to be entertained. If you can, do the stories of, maybe you don't know the sign for bears, and you can do this big thing, and the kid will get it. Eventually, they'll read the story, or they'll hear the story again, of course, and they'll connect. And they'll say, oh, yeah, that's the story my dad used to tell. What happened? So I think that's important, is to be as expressive as you can physically with a deaf child, because it's all about facial expressions and body movements and all that. So if you're going to be inhibited and tight-lipped, then that may be a problem. If you can get yourself that way, your kids will really appreciate it.
When she was really small, there was a lot of labeling all over the house. You had the word, the sign. So again, it was another effort to make sure that she was making the connection with the English and the signing. And that reinforced our learning too.
Yes, just recently I was just thinking about, I know that, obviously spoken English is very important to hearing parents. Obviously myself, I'm a hearing person, but remember that just because your child has gone to speech therapy and can say mom and dad or whatever other words it is that they are working on, there's a difference between just being able to speak words and actually having a language. And so just because your child knows certain words, are they able to put the words together and make a sentence as opposed to just pointing at something and saying it's a book or it's a car? Are they able to make sentences and really use the structure of the language? And I think that's the other thing that signing brings to the table, is you're actually giving them a language, something that they can use to communicate with, and not just one single word. In fact, what you'll find is, as they're speaking, especially if they're saying, oh gosh, they're starting to talk, if you think about it, the words that they are using are probably all nouns, because they're naming things, and those are the things that they're saying. But they're not using, they're not using verbs, they're not using adjectives, because that's not what, that's when you have language.
A message for parents is the sky's the limit. Work, give your child the best opportunity, give your child the best of you.
Well, I think that's the other thing we didn't talk about. She has the love of travel, and I think that's the fact that because of Klein's job, we've moved around a lot. And what we started doing with her when we would travel to see our families and stuff, from a young age, when we would go into an airport, we'd say, okay, this is how you read, let's go up and read the monitor, and where are we going, and what gate does it say? Okay, gee, we're going to have to go to E8. All right, you lead the way. And she, from a young age, would have to find the gate. And she probably started flying on her own. Whatever the youngest age is you can fly on your own, she was flying on her own. And of course that's when they put the little tag on you and you have to go with the stewardess. But as soon as she reached the youngest age that you can fly without being attended by someone, she was flying on her own, and we felt very confident about that. I mean, I'm sure somebody who has a deaf child who's 2 years old right now is thinking, how could you do that? But we taught her to be independent. I mean, deaf people are independent. She doesn't need to be dependent on us. She just needed to have language and learn the ways of life, just like anyone else. So she's been flying all over the country, and she's been on backpack trips to Europe with her friends. She loves to travel,
But I think also, setting aside the academics of it, I think she's turned out to be a pretty good person. She's got this, at sometimes annoying love of dogs. So, these two monster dogs right now at the house. I think she's a good person. That's pretty important.
I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to become president. I always had that flag pin, you remember?
Yes,
the presidential flag pin. I think for 2 years of school pictures when I wanted to become president. And then later on I wanted to become Secretary of State when I was a little less egocentric. And then after that, I thought maybe I would write and I could be a publisher, or I'm not sure. But deaf people can become anything, except for, like he said, an air traffic controller probably, and I'm okay with that. Anything else would be absolutely fine. Maybe I could become an opera singer. An opera signer.
Okay.
I think deaf people can do anything. They can become anything they want to. With technology the way it is these days, along with your dreams, nothing can stop somebody.
Just don't be afraid of the deafness. Yes, it's going to be a challenge. Yes, you're going to feel that it's a loss, and that's normal. But just really focus in on the language, because that's what's really important for the first couple of years. And if you can focus on getting that language in the first 2-3 years of their life, that made all the difference in the world. Once we got language into her, everything just kind of flowed after that.
Because if you go back to Monica and Monica's first sign was
No, it was not. It was grapes.
Oh,
it was grapes. I
She loved
remember.
her grapes. That's right.
We were at the market, and
That's right.
she was sitting in the cart and saw grapes, and there she went with grapes. She was a year old. Yeah.
Yeah. Grapes, milk, and crackers.
Crackers and more.
And more was a good one. Yeah, more was good.
The last word I would say is that it's so much more embedded than you could ever imagine. I mean, it's obviously hard and challenges and there's frustrations, but anything in life that requires, commitment, working, overcoming, it's so rewarding when you get to the stages of life where you see your kid go from elementary school to middle school, from middle school to high school to college to getting your driver's license. It's all stages in life, and you can just marvel at the fact that we made it. We look at where we started. It's so rewarding, and I think as long as you stay positive and be your child advocate and work and accept that there's going to be challenges and it's going to be hard, but it's worth it. That's all I want.
The advice I would give somebody is that, patience. You're going to have to be patient. But, what you don't know, we went through the same thing. We didn't know exactly what was ahead of us and what's out there. We talk about the internet and how much there is on the internet to do, to look forward to. But I think the most important thing is to go out there and explore. Look at all your options. Go out there. There's plenty of resources. There's plenty of people to go talk to. And don't let anybody say that your child can't do this or can't do that, because they can't.
Yeah, it's like that they use this example a lot in, I remember, I don't know where we first learned of it. I think it was in an ASL class,
The trip to Holland?
Yeah, the trip to Holland, you think you're going to
you're going to France, but you land in Holland.
And so you have to, it's like when you don't expect, this kind of thing when you have a child, and then you just have to get on a different plane and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to learn a different way of raising your child. Yeah. And,
Do you know that story about like you're told that you're going to go to Paris, and you have all this expectation about what Paris is like,
then you end up in Holland.
and then in the plane actually it turns out they lied. They brought you to They brought you to Holland, and at first you're really sad, but then you learn, and the Holland wasn't so bad after all, right, or something like that. So.
Well, what I was thinking of was that learning sign language, learning the language that your child uses, it's just so natural. It's so natural, and it shows your child that you really are invested in them and interested in their well-being and their livelihood.
And they appreciate it.
And they
they really appreciate it. We've heard it more than once from Monica. So
it gets you places. I can't imagine not being able to communicate with a child.
Yeah.
With our child. So.
What's your favorite sign?
Wow.
Good.
My favorite. What do I like? Yeah, that's a good